The moment I walked into HR and saw the head of compliance already sitting there, arms crossed like he'd rehearsed this ambush in the mirror, I knew something reeked. Not of coffee, of cover-up. My mug was still warm when she said it. Your presence in the server logs outside standard hours violates our updated access policy. Updated? What policy? No one told me a damn thing. I blinked. Once. Twice. That strange pause you get when reality's trying to finish buffering. I'd spent 6 years building the digital spine of this company. 6 years without a single failed audit. And now I was being fired over. Working too hard. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. I just took one slow sip of my coffee, held her stare, and reached for my phone. A thumbprint. One tap. That's all it took. Something shifted, not in the room, but far below it. Somewhere deep in the system's vaults, a line of code waited to be triggered, and that trigger was me. Real quick, while you're listening, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. 97% of folks don't, and it helps the team keep making stories like this one. Seriously, it means everything. Anyway, they thought I'd panic, that I'd beg for clarification, maybe cry, maybe rage. Instead, I nodded, quietly, collected. The head of compliance looked almost disappointed, like he expected more theatrics. But I'd learned a long time ago, power doesn't yell. It waits. Back at my desk, I did what I always do. Logged in, checked the policy archive. Sure enough, the new policy that got me fired was pushed 3 days ago, retroactive to last week, which, conveniently, was after I'd logged 3 separate alerts into the compliance trail, all flagging strange off-hours access to encrypted files tied to the executive bonus system. I'd seen patterns like this before. Spikes in access around quarterly earnings, data pulls with no ticket, no requester trail, then silence. Suddenly, that silence made sense. They didn't ignore the alerts because they missed them. They ignored them because they saw them. I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. I opened my encrypted folder. Screen recordings, server logs, chain of custody timestamps, internal Slack confirmations, including one from my lead. Thanks for staying late. We'd be toast without you. The HR letter timestamp? 2 hours after that message, which meant the termination wasn't just about access. It was strategic. Clean house before anyone asks questions. Bury the trail by killing the messenger. Unfortunately for them, this messenger wrote the architecture. I was the trail. A notification blinked at the top of my phone. Remote Archive Vault active. Good. The automation script was live, encrypted backups, multi-node distribution, legal lockchain engaged. Everything was in motion. The best part? They had no idea, because they'd spent years treating me like wallpaper. Just another back office tech. The quiet one who wore hoodies and always fixed things without being asked. The one who never made waves. But quiet doesn't mean compliant. It means careful. And I'd been very, very careful. By the time my badge deactivated, I'd already transferred critical credentials to a legal trust. I wasn't bitter. Not yet. Just tired. Tired of watching people in suits pat themselves on the back for systems they couldn't spell. Tired of fixing things only to be forgotten. Tired of being called a liability for doing my job. So I walked out. No drama, no box of things, just me, my coffee, and a phone that now held the keys to every lock they thought they controlled. It wasn't revenge, not yet. But I was about to become the biggest compliance risk they'd ever created. The strangest part wasn't the policy itself. It was the timestamp. The retroactive lockout had been slipped in on a Sunday at 2:14 a.m., a time no one in legal ever worked unless they were trying to bury something before Monday. It smelled like someone trying to rewrite history before the auditors could sniff around. I scrolled back through my alerts. 3 of them, all with attached logs showing unauthorized data pulls on a restricted directory marked Q4 comp planning. The file name structure matched the format used for exec comp modeling. Projections, bonus structures, deferred stock, sensitive stuff. And whoever was pulling those files, they didn't log their credentials. You can't fake that kind of silence unless you're inside the system that makes the noise. I leaned back, hands still on the keyboard. My desk plant, a half-dead pothos I kept forgetting to water, reflected in the monitor. Funny, I thought. I took better care of this company than I did that plant. And they tried to erase me with a policy footnote. I dug into the system access chain. There it was. A manual credential override on the audit kernel. That's not just dangerous, it's stupid. Only 3 people even knew how to do that. And 2 of them were on vacation last week. That left 1. His initials showed up in a cache I'd kept running in the background for 6 years, just in case. TK, Access Bypass, 03:07 a.m. Thomas K., Executive Strategy Lead. No sysadmin background, no access reason, just a ghost print left behind by someone who assumed no one was watching. But I always watched. The Slack thread I'd flagged, still sitting there, unacknowledged. My manager had even pinned it for visibility, not that it mattered. Ignored, like everything else, until now. I opened the message from legal again. The phrasing stuck with me. Let's make sure she doesn't have root anymore. Not the employee, not the account. She. There were only 6 of us on the core team. I was the only woman, which meant I wasn't just being cut. I was being targeted, made into an example. Silently erased before anyone could ask why my logs were the only ones catching the fraud. It wasn't about access. It was about silence. They thought removing my credentials would kill the trail. What they didn't know is I built the trail. Root access wasn't just a privilege, it was a signature. When you design a system like ours, when you embed biometric sequencing, key vault sharding, and physical location syncing, you become the ghost in the machine. And ghosts don't disappear. We haunt. I tapped a shortcut I hadn't touched in years. A small console blinked open. Text only, no UI. It asked for 2 things, a key phrase and a reason. Key phrase, golden hour event. Reason, unauthorized termination of system steward. Vault activation required under clause 14C. I hit enter. No flashy animation, just a slow, steady status bar. 1%, 6%, 12%. I knew the process would take about 9 minutes. That's how long the system needed to complete full state replication across the encrypted nodes. But once it did, the infrastructure, the real one, the one buried under all their dashboards and corporate smokescreens, now would shift. Quietly, legally, permanently. Clause 14C wasn't buried in the employee handbook. It was buried in the system charter. The technical master doc no one outside of engineering had read in full. It was boring, dry, and so deeply embedded it would take a forensics team a month just to find it, unless you wrote it, like I had. Clause 14C stated that in the event of an unauthorized, non-audited termination of the named root steward, the system must enter preservation mode, restricting all privileged access and redirecting administrative keys to the external vault until reviewed by legal counsel of the steward's choosing, which, in human terms, meant you can't touch anything until my lawyer says so. They thought I was just a back-end engineer, just another hoodie-wearing sysadmin with too many coffee mugs and not enough big-picture thinking. What they didn't realize is that infrastructure isn't the code. It's the contracts, the systems, the fallback plans. And I'd just triggered mine. The screen blinked green. Vault status armed. Primary key escrow confirmed. Audit enforcement enabled. External legal notification sent. Somewhere across town, in a dark paneled office, a phone buzzed quietly. My lawyer would see the message. He'd know what to do. We'd practiced this once, years ago, as a thought exercise. Worst case? He'd asked. This, I had said. Except now it wasn't theoretical. Now it was active. It hit me the moment the glass doors shut behind me, that barely audible click of separation, like a vault closing. It was cold out. Not wear a jacket cold. Your breath fogs while your entire career resets in the time it takes to cross a sidewalk. Kind of cold. I didn't stop walking. Just kept pace down the block, hands in my hoodie pocket, trying not to shake. From nerves or adrenaline or maybe just the silence that follows betrayal. My phone buzzed once in my coat lining. That subtle vibration I'd configured years ago for exactly this scenario. Trigger received, legal notified, admin rights rerouted. It felt surreal, like watching a heist movie in slow motion. Except I wasn't the thief. I was the vault. You don't work 6 years in back-end architecture without planning for eventuality. You just don't. Not when your job depends on keeping people honest who make more in stock options than you do in gross salary. Not when you've seen how fast systems go from stable to catastrophic the moment you unplug the wrong person. They hadn't unplugged me, they detonated me. The system I'd built, codename Mirror Root, was designed to detect breaches not of data, but of trust. You don't need AI to tell you when something stinks. You need logs, immutable ones. You need behavior models, pattern regressions. You need a damn memory, which I gave the system in spades. So the moment HR hit terminate, Mirror Root knew. It didn't ask questions. It didn't seek permission. It simply obeyed the protocol. Reroute admin rights to escrow, sever all privileged tokens not verified by biometric match, and lock audit integrity into a read-only state under Clause 14C, which meant no one could overwrite, delete, or modify anything until the designated steward, me, or their legal proxy authenticated through the decentralized sequence. They could try. They could fail. And the system would log every violation attempt as a tampering event. My lawyer texted me back a minute later. All active. Let them call. We're already ahead. He wasn't bluffing. The digital law firm we'd contracted used a smart vault system that operated across 3 jurisdictions: California, Luxembourg, and British Columbia. If they tried to pressure local counsel, they'd hit a wall of cross-border compliance. I kept walking. 3 blocks down, I stopped at the little cafe I liked. The one with terrible espresso but decent Wi-Fi, sat by the window, pulled out my laptop, and tethered it to my phone. Status dashboards were already lighting up. Zurich node, red Singapore, yellow audit controller, timeout, privileged access index, unverified. The numbers weren't chaos, not yet, but they were bleeding in that direction, like watching a dam develop hairline fractures. You know it won't break immediately, but the clock has started, and you're the only one who packed a life raft. Inside their building, someone was probably rebooting something, probably muttering things like DNS issue or external auth handshake failure, because no one would suspect sabotage, especially not from me. That's the gift of being invisible. They always forget you're holding the blueprint. A few seconds later, I saw it. An internal escalation alert, one of the ones I'd set to ping me silently via third-party proxy, flagged an IT ticket. Cannot access secure backend interface. Urgent. Client compliance feed down. I smiled. Not out of malice. Not out of pride. Out of clarity. This was the moment the story split. Before this, I was an employee, a piece in their machine. Now, I was the fail-safe they forgot they built. And the funny part? I didn't even want revenge. I didn't need it. What I needed and what I'd built was something far better. Accountability. Because in tech, code doesn't lie. Logs don't forget. Systems don't move on. They wait, and I'd made sure this one was very, very patient. The espresso machine at the cafe sputtered behind me, making its usual dying cat hiss as I refreshed the dashboard for the 4th time that morning. Every few seconds, another red flag appeared, another system failing to authenticate, another privileged access request hanging in limbo, silently bouncing between layers of encryption they no longer understood. It was like watching someone try to hotwire a spaceship with a paperclip and hope. The escalation patterns I'd hard-coded years ago were finally doing their job, flagging unauthorized credential attempts, surfacing tampering patterns, and triggering alert pings to my private node. I didn't even need to read the message subjects anymore. The rhythm of their panic was familiar. Short bursts, then silence, then longer bursts. A whole building trying to exhale through a straw. Somewhere inside Convergent, they were probably on their 3rd emergency stand-up of the day. IT shouting at InfoSec, legal demanding timelines, HR frantically scrubbing policy language to justify a firing they were now realizing might have triggered something deeper than hurt feelings. They brought in a contractor by 11 a.m., some guy from a third-party ops firm who probably billed $500 an hour and claimed he could regain root in 6 hours flat. I had no doubt he said those exact words while standing over a console and sipping someone else's Red Bull. And I had even less doubt that about 40 minutes in, he hit the same wall everyone else had, the dual auth chain. See, when you work on infrastructure long enough and get burned often enough, you learn one thing fast. Centralization is weakness. I didn't keep a master key. I didn't have a master key. The system was designed to require consensus. 1 part cryptographic credential, 1 part legal attestation from an external vault. You couldn't just hack in, you had to be invited, and I had revoked the invites. The contractor's first request hit my watch node at 11:42 a.m. It was a brute re-auth attempt using legacy credential templates. I flagged it. Not to block him, he was already blocked, but because every failed attempt logged deeper evidence of tampering. By noon, I was watching in real time as their compliance dashboards went dark, one after another. Zurich was the first to fully sever the sync. Without audit assurance, they couldn't legally maintain federated access. Singapore followed shortly after, then Toronto. The platforms were intact. The links were not. And just like that, Convergent went from cloud-enabled global infrastructure leader to a very expensive paperweight. I stirred my coffee slowly and opened the metadata logs. One exec-level user had attempted access to the audit kernel 8 times. The last attempt was made at 3:21 a.m. It failed, naturally. But what made me pause was the signature attached. It matched the same ghost credential that had accessed the bonus planning directory last quarter. Thomas K., so he was still trying to cover his tracks, still hoping, maybe, that the silence in the logs meant I hadn't seen. He didn't realize I built the silence. The entire architecture, mirror root, operated on a simple premise. Noise is messy, but silence is traceable. Every blank space, every missing heartbeat, every malformed query was a signature, and all signatures could be matched. They didn't need to know what he'd done. They just needed to let the system show what was missing. By early afternoon, I saw the Slack logs start to drip in from a shadow API node still running under my credentials, one they hadn't bothered to revoke. Panic had a tone, and Slack captured it well. Who the hell designed this compliance chain? Why can't we just reset root? We're reaching out to legal. Someone's got to have a failsafe. No one did. The failsafe was me, and I was sitting in a cafe watching the machine eat itself, one recursive loop at a time. No malice, no thrill, just clarity. This was what they triggered, not a disaster, a protocol. I had warned them, in writing, more than once, that infrastructure isn't something you fire, it's something you understand. I looked out the window at the people walking by, phones in hand, earbuds in, systems in motion all around them, invisible but absolute. And I thought about how fragile control really is, how companies like Convergent live in a glass palace built on assumptions they never verify. And then they try to fire the one person who holds the floor plan. I finished my coffee. The metadata logs kept flowing, and for the first time in 6 years, I let the system speak for itself. Friday morning, the tone of their Slack messages shifted from frantic to funereal. All caps were gone. No more blame-pinging random engineers like throwing darts at a wall of resumes. Just short, clipped updates, silent status pings, and the occasional ominous call scheduled with external counsel at 10. I already knew what they were about to find. Mirror root wasn't just code. It was contract, architecture, philosophy. It wasn't designed to prevent sabotage. It was designed to prevent stupidity. But in their case, those overlapped. They didn't just cut off a user account. They tried to amputate a brainstem mid-breath and hoped the body would keep walking. I opened the mirrored Slack instance, still running silently on a server they forgot to purge because it was named something boring like Logs Archive Node 3. A few lines trickled in, then the one that made me pause. Conference room B7, legal, compliance, systems, HR all in. A screenshot followed, a clipped capture of the internal invite. The kind of, get everyone in the room before the SEC calls us meeting you don't announce publicly. I opened a new window and queued up the live access tracker. Each node had a soft ping signature that registered when access was attempted. Nothing invasive, just metadata. And as the meeting time hit 10:03 a.m., the failures began cascading in. First, admin core 0 failed root handshake. Then, audit vault 2 rejected biometric pairing. Then, Zurich Sync 01 timed out on credential revalidation. I watched, sipping ginger tea this time, I'd already overcaffeinated, as their entire leadership team flailed behind closed doors, trying to pick a lock they never learned how to build. Back in Slack, one legal assistant was furiously typing. Then came the line that crystallized everything. She authored the system kernel. She's the sole initializer on clause 14C. They said it out loud. I sat with that sentence for a long moment. Not because it surprised me. I wrote clause 14C, tucked it into the system charter, buried it in the dependencies of the audit infrastructure, then attached it to the key distribution terms via legal watermark. What stunned me was that someone had finally read it and understood what it meant. In plain English, clause 14C declared that in the event of improper removal of the root steward, namely me, the system would transition into ethical override mode. Think of it as a fireproof safe that locks tighter if you try to bash it open. Every manual override, logged. Every attempt to roll back access controls, logged. Every missing credential, logged, and set to replicate to a separate legal archive node hosted on a partner's server farm in Virginia. This wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience. They hadn't just fired me. They'd triggered a legally structured escalation sequence, one that didn't require my input, only their missteps. Another HR exec, some poor mid-level enabler caught in the blast radius, typed the next line. So how do we unlock it? And then, nothing. Not a single reply for 6 minutes. I watched that silence settle across every mirrored channel like ash. Slack timestamps crawled by. The contractor, the one who promised he could regain access in 6 hours, he'd gone radio silent, probably billing double time to stare at a console and pray for inspiration. I flipped tabs and pulled up the interface I hadn't opened in months, my original back-end admin panel. It was offline, of course, but the read-only replica interface hummed, soft green, a passive monitor now. Below it, the live attempt log. One by one, every exec in that room had attempted a bypass. One by one, they'd failed. The ethical override was doing its job, guarding against unethical control. It had no emotions, no biases, just logic. If steward credentials were revoked without notarized legal validation and a recorded exit audit, the system would assume duress, fraud, or tampering, and shut down every path but one: restoration through joint legal reauthorization, a 2-key nuclear launch procedure, and they had neither key, because I was both keys, and I wasn't answering their calls. Outside, the weather had shifted. Gray clouds, low wind, the kind of December afternoon where people hurry between buildings and don't stop to look up. But inside that glass tower at Convergent Dynamics, every eye was finally looking in the right direction, not up, but back, toward the quiet one, the one they erased without thinking. The one who, with a single line of code, taught the entire company that access isn't power, custody is. And you don't fire the custodian. By the following Monday, Convergent's smart routing dashboard, usually a wall of healthy greens and casual yellows, looked like a Christmas tree someone had thrown into a dumpster fire. Whole rows of alerts, vendor APIs hanging, payment processing queues looping endlessly. Someone posted a screenshot on an industry Slack I'm still ghosted into. Caption, Convergent down hard. The reply, dead in the water. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just watched. The first real consequence landed at 9:08 a.m. Zurich called. Not tech support. Not integration. Zurich Legal. The partner firm we'd spent 5 years wooing into our ecosystem with talks of uptime SLAs and air-gapped compliance nodes. Their message was short. Formal. Pursuant to Articles 6.3 and 7.1 of our compliance agreement, we are suspending federated access until restoration of traceable audit oversight. Translated, if we can't see who has their hands on the system, you don't get to touch our data. Then came the billing vendor. They refused to process the month's payment schedule, nearly $8 million in receivables, without back-end verification from our system. They needed read-only chain of custody tags for every data packet we touched. It was part of our SOC2 alignment package, and guess who built that alignment pipeline? They tried to spoof it. I watched the failed attempt come through on my private monitor. They copied a past audit key, modified the header, and attempted to re-sign it with a dev cert that expired 2 months ago. It was like watching someone try to forge a signature using crayons and hope the bank cashed the check. The system logged it as tampering tier 2. That designation alone meant another trigger: auto-notify backup compliance contacts. One of them was a senior attorney at the partner firm who immediately emailed Convergence General Counsel with one question. Was your system's steward legally off-boarded? Silence. That same afternoon, I saw an email hit the vault inbox from HR, subject line credential restoration inquiry. The body of the email was a 4-paragraph attempt at diplomacy. Phrases like collaborative spirit, mutual interest, regretful misunderstanding. They wanted me to unlock the system. But clause 14C had no fast track, no password reset, no apology bypass. Restoration required 2 things: a notarized legal notice of reinstatement and an active approval signature from the audit subcommittee, which of course no longer existed. They disbanded it during Q2's efficiency reorg to cut overhead. I remembered that meeting. I even remembered raising the issue. Without audit oversight, who signs off on compliance chain rekeys? The CFO waved it off, said we'd solve that later. Later was now, and the system had nothing to verify. It was like watching a lock click shut around a keyhole they melted for scrap. Then, late Tuesday, the leak happened. Someone from internal IT, probably panicking, probably trying to cover their own ass, leaked a Slack exchange to a private tech channel. Just 5 messages. But it was enough. 9:22 a.m. Who designed this thing? 9:23 a.m. The override? 9:23 a.m. Yes. 9:24 a.m. She did. 9:25 a.m. and she warned us. That was it. No finger pointing, no fake sympathy, just the quiet admission that someone had been told, warned, ignored, and now the walls were closing in. By Wednesday, revenue processing was halted for 4 of our top 10 clients. Legal started drafting letters of indemnification for contracts we couldn't fulfill. I saw one of them come through the system, unencrypted, like they were hoping no one would see. The subject line was containment strategy, but there was no containment. Not anymore. I watched the metrics slide. Support tickets doubled, then tripled. Zurich's suspension notice went from temporary hold to contractual review. Someone in APAC tried to manually restore a mirrored compliance module. But of course, they hit the ethical override too. The system wasn't built to forgive impatience, it was built to remember intent. And every failed attempt logged a little louder than the last. Somewhere, buried in all that digital noise, my name echoed silently in every traceback. Not because I made a mess, but because I wrote the only map out of it, and I was done drawing lifelines. The transcript leak hit the tech channels around 7:43 p.m. Thursday night. I wasn't watching the main Slack anymore. Too much noise, too many desperate half measures. But I had alerts set up for a few keywords, and the moment clause 11B and my name showed up in the same packet, the system nudged me gently. It was a voice transcript, slightly garbled, likely from a call recording someone forwarded internally and didn't mean to. It started mid-sentence, right as external counsel was clearly losing patience. Sir, stop. She's the only one who can unlock the system, and if she invokes Clause 11B, any tampering attempts will log as legal violations. Do not push this further. You could almost hear the tension in the air like static. I imagined the CEO in that moment, probably still clutching onto the fantasy that this was an IT hiccup, not a procedural implosion. A man so confident in the size of his chair that he never once bothered to ask who installed the seat bolts. Then came his voice, flat, hesitant, the sound of someone realizing they're not in the driver's seat anymore. Can someone just talk to her? That line bounced across Twitter before I'd even finished the message. Someone made it into a GIF. Another turned it into a t-shirt. I just watched it loop. Again and again. A Fortune 500 CEO reduced to a whispery plea for basic dialogue. And then came the part that did make me smile. My lawyer, who, bless him, had prepared for this day like a war game, responded on the record. She'll consider a limited reinstatement under full contractual settlement, he said, voice calm and clipped, like he was ordering lunch. Also, her coffee budget must be restored. Fully. The silence that followed was reportedly 23 seconds long. A pause that deep wasn't just about caffeine, it was about control. They didn't understand the joke because they still didn't understand the system, or the person behind it. They thought I wanted vengeance. I wanted acknowledgement. The board was now fully aware that the core infrastructure wasn't just down, it was in defense mode. Any tampering triggered by unauthorized attempts would not only be unrecoverable, it would be reportable. Clause 11b wasn't just a compliance detail, it was a legal kill switch, and they were one more brute force attempt away from waking up to a federal systems disclosure review. The kind of audit that doesn't end in a fine, but in orange folders marked provisional oversight. They didn't need an engineer, they needed the engineer. Me. The reinstatement draft arrived 2 hours later. Polite, crisp, backed by external counsel signatures, a full contractual settlement package with severance, indemnification, and a clause-specific override token procedure, including attestation fields for chain of custody revalidation. All the things they refused to give me a week ago, now offered on a silver tray with an urgent timeline. The best part? They weren't asking for my return. They were begging for my permission. The system's re-entry protocol wasn't just technical, it was symbolic. It required a gesture of good faith, a key phrase signed digitally that served as both handshake and watermark. I didn't hesitate. I typed the phrase slowly, like I was sealing a vault rather than opening one. Reinstatement accepted under escrow. System activation conditional. Trust not assumed. It blinked green. The nodes began realigning. Access chains revalidated. Audit links began to pulse with traceable life. Zurich reconnected. The billing system coughed awake. The system hadn't forgiven them. It had acknowledged me. Outside my window, the cafe lights buzzed. A kid chased a plastic bag down the sidewalk like it was treasure. Somewhere in a boardroom across town, a CEO probably thought this was the end of the crisis. But he was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was just the read receipt. By Monday morning, every firewall at Convergent dropped its shoulders like a building exhaling. The system was alive again. Not restored, reinitialized. There's a difference. Restoration implies they fixed something. Reinitialization means I handed them the heartbeat they couldn't find on their own. It also meant they no longer had the original keys. Just borrowed breath. I never set foot back in that building. They sent the severance terms over with courier-level urgency, as if paperwork could erase humiliation. I didn't read the apology section. Didn't care about the language tweaks their PR team probably spent 12 hours massaging into something that sounded collaborative instead of desperate. What mattered were the signatures. All 7 of them, including the one exec who once called me the back-end girl during an investor walkthrough. I signed. 1 stroke, 1 download, 1 encrypted package upload to the law firm's vault, and then silence. The system blinked green across all dashboards by 10:47 a.m. My last token, Sequence Kappa, registered cleanly. Their infrastructure stabilized. But just beneath the polished UI in small gray font under the compliance section footer, a log line pulsed like a heartbeat. Last maintained by the one you called a violation. They tried to scrub it. They couldn't. It wasn't embedded in the display layer. It was part of the audit trail architecture, burned into the header tags of every data confirmation packet. It was metadata, not branding. Every third-party vendor, every compliance partner, every quarterly report would now carry my name, not in neon, but in permanence. I didn't return their follow-up email asking if I'd consider collaborating on a revised continuity protocol. I had no interest in being their safety net anymore. Instead, I turned the page. Consulting picked up faster than I expected. Turns out, when news gets around that you architected a system resilient enough to survive a self-inflicted corporate execution, other firms get curious. They ask how I did it, how I saw it coming, how I encoded so much legal logic into lines of Bash and Python. And I tell them, because I never trusted the org chart. I trusted integrity. I now spend my days building infrastructure for companies that actually understand what that word means. Ones where risk isn't something to bury in footnotes, and back-end engineers don't get ghosted for asking why a VP has root access at 3 a.m. Once a year, I speak at a secure systems conference. The crowd's always mixed. Ex-military coders, gray hat devs in jeans and Birkenstocks, a few tired CISOs who know better than to laugh too early. I tell them the story in broad strokes. The coffee, the clause, the kill switch, the silence. And then I say the line that gets the chuckle every time. They fired me for being early. The code didn't like that. Afterward, someone always approaches and asks, "Did you ever go back? Just to show them?" I smile, shake my head. I didn't need to. They see my name every day, and the system never forgets. Convergent Dynamics never released an official postmortem. No blog post, no cheerful LinkedIn pivot story, no clever Medium piece titled Resilience Through Reassessment or whatever euphemism PR usually dusts off in the wake of near collapse. Just silence. Controlled, managed, costly. But in our circles, silence says everything. The CTO stepped down to pursue new opportunities. No one asked which ones. The engineering team was restructured. Half the names I used to ping for after-hours patching quietly disappeared from their internal org tree. Compliance filed a final report, sealed for internal review only, but I saw the redacted version. Enough to know it wasn't an error. It was a failure cascade, self-inflicted, avoidable, and named. My legal watermark was cited in 3 appendices, not for fault, for foresight. At home, the phone I tapped that morning sits framed in my office, still scuffed from where I dropped it once in a server cage trying to trace a faulty RAID cluster. Still logged in to the old Vault account, though now I keep it powered off. It's not a trophy, it's a record. Every now and then, when the news cycle drifts to another breach or meltdown, I see some Convergent exec quoted on panel about system integrity or enterprise resilience, and I smile a little, because I know which parts of their current infrastructure were born out of panic and which were born out of my silence, and I know which ones still carry my fingerprints. These days, I teach when I want to. Quiet sessions, no slides, no fanfare. Just a few chairs, some code, and the real stories behind the systems that hold the world together while the rest of it sleeps. I call the class Never Fire the Key Holder. It feels faster than I expect. The students always ask the same question near the end. Would it have turned out differently if they'd just talked to you? I never answer directly. I just click to the final slide. A black screen, white letters, center-aligned, policy violation. It was, just not mine.